Welcome. This is a little look at lettering, and it's going to be very informal, but lettering doesn't have to be formal, so let's just start. This is in conjunction with a bunch of other SAW resources in a little self-guided session called OMG Lettering, so you can take a look at some of the other resources that are available there. Let's start with the fact that lettering is drawing, and it should be considered as part of your panel, as part of your page. The balloon should be part of it, etc. So let's look at how lettering can work. First of all, from SAW community member Hannah McGill, they say, "What is good lettering? It leads the reader through a comic. It is implemented without suffering." I would also say it is designed to lead the reader through the comic without suffering as well. So it doesn't strain the reader too much to figure out how to fit it in, where they don't have to decipher the lettering. They don't have to decipher the panels themselves. They don't have to work excessively hard to make their way through the comic. And also it shouldn't be too much suffering. I like to show this panel. It's this sort of prototypical comic book balloon. It's an oval and a triangle stuck together, and a bunch of words in the middle. And it says, "I'm a comic book," but you don't have to do it that way. What I'm hoping, what we always hope at SAW, is that you will find your own way to make your words work with your images. So some quick examples real fast. Kyle Baker, for instance, in this book called Why I Hate Saturn, his text was all below the panel. The images were completely self-contained. The dialogue, the book was very dialogue heavy. It all went below the panel, and it was you kind of read it like subtitles. Sort of on the opposite end, meaning it was above the panel and not below, is Yvonne Baudet. All of his Cheech Wizard and other comics, he did the same thing, where it was like you were reading word balloons or subtitles, but in fact they were word balloons above the characters' heads, which is sort of traditional, but in fact in these instances they were outside of the frame. Why did he do that? I'm not really sure, but it is its own method of putting words and pictures together, and you get used to it and it becomes effortless and you really enjoy it. You can also give a lot of thought to your lettering, like Brian Biggs here. 3 different character types here. No, sorry, 2. Anyway, this cop speaks in this like really intense, thick sans serif font. We'll talk about serifs and stuff like that. But the rest of the lettering is cursive. Actually, this is cursive, and these balloons here from this character, who's also narrating, occasionally are a mixture of uppercase and lowercase. Anyway, so it's not the standard lettering. It's not the standard lettering we're used to. It's part of the picture. Look how this cop and this thick letters, and these thick letters work with the thick, dark, black spaces in his design. Here's some more examples, and we'll look at Vanessa Davis later, but she does really organic shaped balloons. She does cursive. She does it without boxes. Also a mixture sometimes of uppercase and lowercase, and we'll look more at that. The point of all this is that it doesn't have to look like that. It can look like a lot of other things. It's not handwriting, it's drawing. Make it beautiful if you can, like you make your drawings beautiful. And if you can't make it beautiful, make it interesting. Make it something the readers want to engage with. And if you can't make it interesting, well, at least make it easy to read. You don't need all these. For instance, you can find out a lot about typography by looking on the internet. You can learn about ascenders and descenders and stuff like that. We don't need to go into it too much. The one main thing I want to go into, however, is right here. Spacing, kerning, and over here, leading. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are lots of places to learn. We mentioned sans serif and serif. Serifs are these little, tiny little Sometimes they call them feet. They're little embellishments on the letter. When there aren't those embellishments, they're sans serif. Surprisingly, serif is easier to read, they say, because these serifs sort of create a shape in our brain that we're used to, something like that. Leading. To me, this is the most important thing ever. And there'll probably be a separate little part about leading somewhere, but this is Hannah again talking, and Hannah's a professional letterer. And they give us this example here. Comics can have much tighter leading. Leading is the space between the lines, that's all. What makes a comic layout look professional is that the same leading is maintained throughout the comic. Looser leading tends to read, quote, read slower, like this. I will add, and I will mention this elsewhere, shorter lines need shorter leading. Long lines like these actually work well with a larger leading, with wider spaces. Short lines don't need as much. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so if you're working digitally, things just aren't going to make sense exactly. What? Two typefaces set at 12 point can look like they are the same sizes, different sizes? That's so unfair. I'm calling my agent. This is Hannah again. Hannah's great. Go check out their books. I think hmcgillart.com. Anyway, so you can see that these are both 12 points. So don't get too reliant on what the computer is telling you. What you're going to have to do is print things out, try things out, and experiment. And once you experiment to the point where you're happy, stick with that. Tracking or letter spacing is the space in between the letters. Most of the defaults on computer lettering are usually fine. When something is broken, you use kerning to fix it, meaning you squeeze letters closer together or you separate them and stuff like that. You don't have to get too into that, but that's what it is. So we'll talk a little bit about more of this and how it applies to your lettering in a bit. Some good rules of thumb. Use containers, and by that I mean word balloons, but I don't think you should call them word balloons. Call them something else. Use containers that match your artwork. We'll show some examples. Use letters that match your artwork. You probably need ruled guides or straight lines unless you've been doing it a long time, in which case you can play around with it. Or in which case, if you're really confident that it's working. This is important. Give your letters room to breathe in the containers. And create your bunches of text as a graphic and cognitive unit. In other words, it's part of the design of the drawing and the panel. Here's an important one. Hannah is saying again, use a minimum of 1 letter space to keep text from being annoyingly close to the edge of your bubbles. Make larger margins for an airy feel. So right here, there's an extra sort of space about 1 letter width. Actually, it's quite larger towards the sides here. Same for narration blocks, and you can see it here more easily. Maybe you want them to have the same margins, but keep it consistent. And we'll look at more examples of that in a bit. In fact, here's one. Gary Panner looks pretty ratty, right? That's the term that they use for his artwork all the time. However, Gary is a really good letterer and knows these rules. There's 1 letter space around here. It's a little tiny bit tight there. And they're ruled borders. Oops. They're ruled lines, rather, for the letters. Here's that space. That space is comfortable for that lettering to sit in. Same thing here. You can't read this. That's because he's having fun. And he's a kind of cartoonist who can make you work for certain elements, but also other elements he knows to make easy for you without suffering, right? So these balloons are really easy to read. Linda Barry uses tons and tons of lettering. She's mostly straight. It's mostly straight, and it mostly has that little space around it. Do you see that? Even in this really tightly packed comic, it gets a little tight here, but that sort of is reflective of the tightness, the sort of claustrophobia of this comic, actually, the way that the language and the conversation is happening so quick. But there's that space. There's that space. Maybe losing it a little bit there, but it's in general, it's there. And she's having fun fitting all these word balloons in between the characters. She's thinking about where it fits visually and cognitively. Like how does it fit when it's happening between the two characters lying in bed together? Here's a great example from an old UK romance comic. And what I want you to see is there's two examples, a good example and a bad example on the same page here. This has lots of nice space, it's easy to read. This has lots of nice space, it's easy to read. This, look at over here, you can't read that. Or at least you can't read it easily. Truth is, I haven't got any idea. See, my eye starts to slip over here. I have an idea still, never give up. My eye starts to slip over here. What do you want to see? It's too tight, it's too tight. That balloon could have been bigger. They had lots of room for it. Not sure why this letterer made it so tight, and here too. But in here too, I think a little bit more room would have been helpful. This, some people might argue that's a little too much. I think it's just about right. This is just about right. That's a little tiny. Especially when it's got to sit on top of such busyness here, you want to give it a little bit more white space so it pops. And that is, again, it's to alleviate the suffering of the reader. Ruled lines. Here's some great examples from classic comic strips. This is Bloom County. If you look at the originals, you can see the ruled lines are there right on the paper. These blue lines didn't reproduce, so they were pre-printed on the paper so that the cartoonist could draw over top of it and have the lettering exactly where they wanted it. And there's some great examples of that. There are more. Some here he's not using word balloons. Here he is using word balloons. I noticed that he starts from the top line when he's not using word balloons. He starts from the second line when he is, and that word balloon reaches up to that top line. And there you go. What else do we have? Closer in. Same thing on Pogo from Walt Kelly. You can see Walt Kelly's ruled lines, and the same thing. And we'll look at this in a bit. Ruled line spacers, ruled line spacers. It's all there. Walt Kelly's images and his lettering was really fancy sometimes. It sort of was hoping to create a sort of cadence inside your head as you read this. So that's just a look at the ruling of lines, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Our word balloons, or containers as we sometimes call them. This great page from Brendan Leach's The Pterodactyl Hunters is a great example. I took the lettering out to show you that the balloons, or the containers as we'll call them, fits the style of the drawings. These lines are kind of the same lines that the drawings are made out of. The shapes fit really well. They fit both visually on top of the patterns and contrasts that are behind it, but also the shapes, or the kinds of shapes that are in the comic. You know, these aren't regular ovals, just like these aren't regular rectangles, and these aren't regular sort of faces. Everything's just a little irregular in the consistent way. It's really beautiful. Here's a classic example, a couple classic examples. This is standard, very, very, very packed lettering, probably too much. And also they are not doing a great job with their extra bit of space in certain areas, but in other areas they are, like here. But look at this one, it's all squared balloons. Why? This one is a more designed comic. Look at that signature there. It's a more designed comic. It has this more of an Art Deco feel. The balloons as such have this nice squared quality. This is a little more standard. Everything's a little more workmanlike. Just sort of get the words in there and get the balloons around it and call it a day. You can of course choose no balloons at all. Lots of cartoonists do. This is Ivan Brunetti. This is M.K. Brown. Jules Pfeiffer. But again, clear, ruled lettering in almost every instance, and no suffering. This is super old, 1780s, I think. And to me, it's just beautiful, and it can work. This is Mickey Z she's a great modern cartoonist, and her lettering doesn't look too different than this from 200 and some years ago. The way it sort of comes directly out of the mouth, the way it sort of works its way up. You see that here in a lot of these. I think there's a terrific repurposing of old techniques. So you get to decide how it looks, what kind of effect you want, how it fits in with the personality of your story, how it fits in with the psychology and emotions of your story. Here's Will Eisner showing a woman in distress, the words sort of like leaking out of her. I don't believe this is happening to me in my condition, I'll drop. Very melodramatic, but he's very in control of what he's doing. Here it's in word balloons, here it's not. You have lots of options when you are thinking about what lettering you're going to use. Here I've used mostly the same word balloon, but I've used 5 different fonts. The text is, I wish I could have a pony. Which one feels more like this character expressing either with a little bit of anguish and delight that he wants a pony? It could be this one. Could be this one. I mean, could be any of these. You decide. This one is created with the same font we did the book in, so a font like that is more likely to be scanned cerebrally in a large scale book or something, large blocks of text. Might not be a wise choice for inside a small word balloon. This is a pre-purchased font. Works a little bit better to my eyes. This one's very mechanical. You might want that because maybe a character that gives an effect that your character wants, or the whole book wants, but more than likely you're going to want something like this or this, which sort of speaks in the sort of language that your visuals speak. The character is drawn with similar lines to these lines. I should point out this is a font actually from handwriting, and this is actually hand lettered. Sometimes there's significant differences. So what else do we have here? So one of our students allowed me to share this. This is Helen, and her story looks like this. Meanwhile, Tommy and Froggy's mother is wondering where they'd gotten off to. Where are those kids? Dinner's almost on the table. Ding dong. I suggested to her that a little bit of tightening up of the lines and tightening up the lettering and making a little bit more consistent, like Hannah mentions, would help. So we found a font and we sort of typed it out and chose a good leading. I think this works well, and sort of put that in there. Likewise, we sort of identified where the words are and put a little white over it, and then put that same font in there. Where are those kids? Dinner's almost on the table. To me, it's starting to look a tiny bit mechanical, like maybe it's not perfect, but I think it's easier to read than this, which is the lettering's a little all over the place. So let's keep going. And then Ding Dong, we put in the same font and sort of put it in there. Oops. And to me, that's a little, there's still some ways to go to make this like really perfect if that's what you wanted to shoot for, but to me this is really readable, and that's the most important thing. Make it readable. Here's some fancy lettering. This is from a professional letterer who just chooses to sort of play around when he makes his own sort of comic strips. So you can see these fancy little letters and stuff. Here's another example from my book on comic strips. How do you want your boom to look, right? If it's a boom, is it this mechanical boom? Is it this very significant? I think that's in fact the impact font. So maybe that does have some impact that you like. Is it this cursive, this elegant like font that you might put on a wedding invitation? Maybe, but doubtful, but maybe. I would probably go with something like that, which feels a little bit more chaotic and also feels a little organic as well. But again, you decide, you choose what effect am I going for, what font, what choice of drawing style will get me there. Same thing with this bird, this duck quacking. You know, does it quack like that? A fancy tin duck might quack like that, or maybe a very definitive duck might quack like this, but I think that's Comic Sans actually. Does a duck quack in Comic Sans? I don't know. But to me, that's probably the most likely one. That just feels like the kind of quack that that a duck quacks out. And again, sometimes you want to feel how that sounds in your body to sort of find something appropriate. So sometimes, oh, here we go. Typographers and letterers and translators and things like that have to sort of mimic, they don't just like find a font that works. They have to mimic somebody's natural handwriting style, or natural lettering style, I should say, natural drawing style. This is from a French book, and the person who translated it and did the lettering had to make it sort of look and feel like that drawing and like the original letters did, and I think they did a pretty good job here. Oops. So other examples, this is both from Craig Thompson, who in 2 different books chose 2 wildly different lettering styles. This here is sort of, it's a little bit lighthearted. It's a mixture of uppercase and lowercase, a mixture of cursive and non-cursive, and it gives it a little lighthearted feel. This is all a very simple sans serif, but it's also italics. It sort of feels like the simplicity and the urgency that teenagers experience everything in. I think that works well for this book. It didn't need something this fanciful. Likewise, this book over here on the left didn't need something this urgent. So let's see what else we have here. We saw this Brian Biggs piece before. Look how that feels like authority. Somebody who's not going to give in. Somebody who's not going to listen to both sides of the story. You know, just collecting information and telling people what's what. Whereas this character probably has a lot of thinking going on in their brain. We don't know how. I don't exactly know, but there's something funky and fancy about this person. This is from Cerebus, a very odd book, and it's certainly a really distinct couple of pages where this Margaret Thatcher character is sort of lecturing this character in this gigantic block of text with an enormous amount of space behind it. But then it changes, and now you got 1 word per balloon. You take your time, and everywhere they are going for an effect of how you hear it in your head and what it looks like, or what it sounds like and feels like coming from this character who is admonishing this character's drinking. And we see certain words, dances get spread out, nice gets extended vertically. You get white on black here, drink yourself to death spelled out in bones, all sorts of things. Very, 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 very playful, and going for a certain kind of effect. And let's see what we got. I think that is the last one. Let's keep moving. Some examples. Here's Vanessa Davis, and she's just somebody who uses a little bit of everything. She started out looking like this, really just having no qualms about trying anything. Here she's got a balloon that's a little bit, just a little bit stylish, a little bit wonky, that goes along with her drawings. Here there's no balloon at all. It's the same comic. It's 2 panels. She would just write down the date, and from there she's just sort of expanded her sort of toolbox of playful lettering. She's gotten comfortable letting things expand outside of the balloon. That works well here. It works well. Maybe it's this party scene, where things can often overlap, or maybe it's something else. I think she does it elsewhere too. She uses cursive. But notice, like, when she wants it to be red, it's still straight lines. It's still decent lettering that makes sense. She puts things in in boxes. She's got a little bit of space, a good amount of space around it. Here too. A mixture of cursive and non-cursive, and she's just really having fun with the fact that lettering is part of what she uses to draw with. Let's see what else we got. Here's some old comics, playing around with letting the lettering just sit right outside that balloon. Cursive outside the balloon. But it's very conscious, these decisions. There's so many different types of lettering. They're an artist's lettering, I think. This is hard to read, but you can see some of the same things going on there. And we looked at this page already, these long tails, which are really fun to look at. And here again, playfully letting the balloon be kind of tight there. Because so much of this is about the stress between the characters, the sort of angry psychology that the characters are experiencing. So there's a little tightness that's allowable there, I think. Example, Gary Panner, famous punk cartoonist. They call his art ratty or good bad art. Looked like this early on, really sketchy, carefree. Still in the tradition of regular comics a little bit. Lettering is carefree, just like the drawings. But as time goes on, this is a little bit later. These drawings are extremely expressive, violent, even chaotic, almost. But notice the lettering, really clean, ruled, to sort of contrast with the extremely expressive art. This is from the same story. Again, it's ruled, it's really straightforward. And we've seen art by him like this, more comic strip looking stuff, and even still, you can even see hints of the ruler lines here. Art like this, he's even using rulers to rule his lines. And that extra amount of space around the words inside the balloons, it's there, it's here. Yeah, it's getting a little close there, but it's basically there. He's aware of that. He's trying to give you good lettering that alleviates the suffering, as Hannah might say, while reading it. Even here, something he probably dashed off quickly. It's about comics, so it's worth reading. The quest of comics is to trick you, the reader, into believing that I, a mere nothing, a scribble, a scrap, am alive as you. You know, he's really playing. He knows that he can get away with certain things, extending the word indicating here. You can even see him trying to almost fit it in maybe, and then realizing he wasn't gonna, so he just spreads it out. This is probably drawn in pen very quickly and not planned ahead, but I think because he's playing with what is a line, what is a comic, what are you reading? He says, you can see that I am nothing, an outline indicating head, torso, and foot, an eye, and scar, and stubble. Do I even have an arm? You know, the outlines or the sort of rules of good lettering are here, and he's sort of breaking them a little bit. Notice here, it's mostly clean with ruled letters, or with ruled lines, with that extra space. But he's just playing with how much he can get away with asking you to identify with these kinds of lines and these kinds of letters. So he's being playful here. And Ron Regi, somebody who went a similar route, being able to letter decently at first. Let's look here. You know, there it is, ruled, you know, or they're at least straight, these lines. There's that extra amount of space inside the word balloon. He's got a playful little extra embellishment inside his word balloon tails. You can see it here, here, here. But it's straight. It's the lettering is simple. It's clean and readable and it's got that extra space. Later on, he went very, very abstract, and now his lettering looks sort of like this, although a lot of times you're not looking at word balloons, you're looking at narration or even adaptations of certain kinds of stories. And he wants you to work hard. He wants you to work hard at looking at all of this stuff. He wants to sort of entrance you. The form is not the life. There is an essence which continues. Who can remember all the details of yesterday's actions? Karma, reincarnation, yes, but which parts return? And as you work through the deciphering of the words, you look over the pictures as well, and everything becomes this sort of singular cosmic flow. Let's see if we can see one or two more. Yeah, here's a couple more. And he's really riffing on almost graffiti-like lettering now. Here he's going for more angular types of letters to sort of coincide with these angular shapes that he's giving these particular characters with their triangle heads and these almost robotic Tin Man sort of legs and things. So he's really playing with lettering from early days like this to later days like that. So, yes, if you know the rules, you can break them a little. You can do these things. And content warning, there's one image of thought of self-harm here. But you can use mechanical lettering. This image from Martha is from this absurdist, repetitive dialogue, and so the mechanical lettering sort of like reminds us of the mechanical nature of this relationship, and it works really well. Here's some other things you can do. This is from Hannah's talk. You don't have to fit in your word balloon awkwardly like it is here. You can extend it beyond the border like this. You can take out half of it and bunch it up against the corner like that. You can put it behind a character. People even do it in front of a character, but you have to be careful with that. You can use a transparent balloon. Very rarely do I see this outside of Japan, but it's super cool. You can use a transparent balloon. You can have the lettering and the words inside a balloon sort of meshing together. You can use cramped lettering like this, because the whole point of this panel is to show that she is in danger and that this is a cramped situation for her. You can use your lettering to sort of continue your narrative intent. You can go to medieval or Renaissance art, and you can use ribbons. You can use anything coming out of a person's mouth to sort of emulate speech. You can do what Vanessa does, which is a variety of types of lettering. You can extend your balloons. We saw this past a panel border. You can have a balloon from one panel overlap a balloon from another panel. You can do all sorts of things like that. Your balloons they can be geometric shapes, they can be rectangles, they can squiggle all over the place so long as it's readable, these characters say. You can put it outside of the panel. You can use it in text above or below the panel. You can find some other way to do it. You can put it over a character's face if it has a narrative purpose, as this panel does. So you have lots and lots of options, so long as you sort of know that your main goal is to make it readable and effortless for the reader. Quick look at this series of tips from blambot, professional comic letterers. I've got my own feelings about some of these, and I'll be happy to share them. Blambot is excellent at what they do, which is professional lettering for the comic book industry. I think for our purposes at SAW, we have more personal goals, so some of this will be applicable and some of it won't, but let's take a look. Oh, I versus I. So it is a good idea actually here. you use the I with the little bars when you're trying to identify the first person singular, but you don't use it here. This is when you're using all caps, which you don't have to do. But yeah, that's worth thinking about. Let's keep going. So learning about kerning, which we talked about, you usually don't have to do that manually anymore because most fonts automatically do it, but you might have to. If your word looks like this, you are going to have to mess with it a little bit, so it might happen. This is a great example that they're showing you. The word stayed here doesn't read very well. A big boom, they give you some examples. What's a good visual representation of bawoom so that it works with the narrative? This is a good example. They're doing their work in Adobe Illustrator. You can read more about it from blambot's website. They say don't cross balloon tails ever. Don't do this. I've seen plenty of people do it, and to really fun effect, I say do it when you know what you're doing, but don't do it when you don't know what you're doing. Have fun with it. Vanessa Davis could probably get away with this. Lots of other cartoonists who have a playful way of directing the tails from their balloons can get away with it. But in general, it's true that this is good. This is good. This is difficult, but I would say give it a try. This is great. They're talking here about spacing and what looks good and reads and what reads well inside a balloon. Notice the word Jim is just sitting there all orphaned, and everything else is selling encyclopedias too is the next line. What you're trying to do is create a unified piece of lettering that reads as a thought, and it reads as a piece of text, it reads as an idea. This reads as Jim, and then a bunch of other stuff. So what you want is more like this, and if you take a look at this more at this website, you'll see that they're doing a little bit of tricks here and there to make sure that things fit. Consistent balloon tails. I agree with this a lot, actually. I think consistency and unity is really good. What you're seeing is a wide tail there, a skinny tail there in the same panel. It's going to read strange. It's a little bit off-putting. Wide here, skinny here, wide here, or skinny here, wide here. These are all consistent. I agree with this mostly. I disagree with this. I think you can do needlepoint tails, what this person's calling needlepoint tails, but it's tricky. But try it. If it works with your artwork, it works. But be consistent. Line and negative space. Here we go. Now we're talking about leading again. This is clearly too tight. The adjacent lines are nearly touching. Yep. This is perfect in this author's opinion. I agree. This is too far apart. It wouldn't look right. And now we're looking at the space around the balloon. I agree this one looks good to me. I agree that one's a little bit big. I agree that's too little. So this is about some typical ways that professional industry comics have dealt with foreign languages. You can decide how you want to handle things like that. Proper use of quotation marks. That's up to you. Using italics in comics dialogue. That's up to you, but be consistent. Ellipses and double dashes, also up to you. Be consistent. The 94% line width cheat. So this is great. That's an inconsequentially tiny matter of physics, Dr. Smith. Here, they reduced the word inconsequentially to 94% width. So it's not as long as it was here, and it sort of unifies the whole thing. Great idea. I agree. Layering balloons in a conversation. I think this is a good rule of thumb. 1A, 2A, 1B, you can get away with that. that's underlapping. 1A, 2A, 1B, what's the big difference there? Oh, it overlaps here rather than underlaps. 1A, 2A, 1B. In all instances, it's the zigzag that's helping make it readable. So give it a whirl. Let's see what their tips are. Lettering should be clear, legible, and reading order should never be in question. True. If possible, avoid covering figures with lettering. True. If you have to cover figures with lettering, cover them as little as possible. True. There are two styles of letter in comics dialogue. The serif I is for personal pronouns, I, I'll, I'd, and the slash I is for everything else. Bit, slight, gripe. Sure. Not a big deal, but I think so. That's if you're using capitals, which you don't have to do. Font choice, yeah, should always complement the artwork completely. Lines of dialogue should always be stacked to evenly fill the ovoid space of a balloon. I agree if you're using ovoid spaces. Otherwise, I agree. While balloons may overlap for effect or to save space, balloon tails should not. I think that's up in the air. Balloon tails should be economical as possible. Ridiculously long tails should be avoided. If I hear something like that, I think, okay, I'm going to make a comic using only ridiculously long tails. So you could give that a whirl. Spoken balloon tails and thought balloon tails should seem to point in the direction of the speaker's head as much as possible. I think that helps make things clear. I would agree with that. The width of balloon tails, where they meet the balloons, should be consistent throughout a comic. I agree. Sound effects should be dynamic, as if emanating from the source of the sound, and their design should be reflective of the sound. I agree. I try to avoid placing balloons in a character's line of sight. Oh, particularly when two characters are facing each other in conversation. It's not always possible due to space. That is really interesting, and I haven't heard anyone say that actually. That makes sense. I crop balloons against panel borders wherever possible. Great. Let's see if there's more. This is all about computer lettering, so you will find more on the blambot website. It's really good stuff, and you can learn more about them there. This is about like radio, typical types of radio and thought balloons and stuff like that, and that stuff isn't that interesting. Because you don't have to do things that can the way it's always been done. But if you want to learn the way it has been done, this is your website. Visual differences in point sizes, like Hannah talked about, and that's a little bit more about letters. Symmetrical versus organic balloons. Okay, so what they're talking about here is this is an oval, a clear oval. This is a clear oval. This is hand-drawn, so it's a little bit more wobbly. This is a little bit more wobbly. They both are fine, but you can just sort of see the differences in how the lettering is going to sit in it. It's really up for you to choose. More stuff about lettering on the computer. Oh, look at that. Colors for sound effects and traditional hand lettering ideas, which aren't as used as much. There you go. That is the blambot look, professional comic industry lettering, and it's worth taking a look at their website for that.